Welcome to Web Development Lesson 2.8. In this lesson, we're going to cover web page layouts, common sections of a web page, and we're going to implement all of this using Flexbox. So let's get to it. So we have our blank replit with a couple of resources for us to use, but let's take a look at that mock-up of the web page we want to create. So you can see here we have a nav bar up top, we have a banner, we have a main section with some information on the left side, some information on the right side, and then finally a footer. So let's go to our replit and let's start sketching that out. So we saw that we have a nav bar, so I'm going to use the nav element for that. And because we're going to use Flexbox, we know that we're going to want to create some kind of a class and then give that class a display of flex. And let me just copy this so we can kind of go through. I recall that the next section was the banner section, so I'm going to do this with an ID. So I'll call this section banner. And let's also give that class container, which again, we'll be changing the property of display to flex, so we can use Flexbox. The next section is the main section. So let's do the same thing. Let's give it an ID of main, and let's add it to the class container. Again, so we can use Flexbox. I'm going to keep reiterating that. That's the focus of this lesson. And then the last section was the footer section. So let's say ID equals footer in the class container. And there we go. So let's just take another look at what we've done in terms of, trying to sketch out the web page. So we have our section for our nav bar, we have our section for our banner, we have our section for the main content, we have a section for our footer. This should be the approach you take whenever you design a web page. Lay out the big containers first and then work your way in. Now for us, I have some of this information already saved so it can start looking a little nicer. So I'm going to go ahead and grab the information. Let's actually populate the links to the nav bar. Let's put the banner information in there. Let's take the information for the main. Actually, let me leave the main for a second because I just noticed based off the sample code. We have to do something else special in the main. Let's just lay this stuff out. And let's see what it looks like without any CSS. Again, it's just the information. So the first thing we're going to want to do is to create that container CSS rule that then transforms all the display property to flex. And just by doing that, let's see how that adjusts. So you might not be able to tell, but everything now has become essentially inline. So we're going to have to fix this up a little bit. I want to start with the nav bar. So if you recall, display of flex is for the container, and then each of the items within the container need to have some kind of a flex. So let me go ahead and target the hyperlinks that are inside this nav element. And let's give it a flex of 1. And notice how now it evenly spaces out. Let's do a little bit of maybe padding, just so that the links aren't up against the edge. So notice it looks a lot nicer. And while we're here, let's go actually align the text too. Align text center. And that way the links appear in the center of their respective containers. All right, great. So now we could change our focus over to the banner. Now, one of the things with the banner, when we look at it, it was centered. It had a blue background. And let's try to handle the centering part first. So let's give it a height. Should I do this correctly? So let's give it a height of, let's say, perhaps 200 px. And now let's go ahead and do justify content center and align items center. And if you recall, this is the technique of centering something using Flexbox. While we're here, I might as well convert the background to blue. Let's convert the letters to white, and let's cross our fingers. And there we go. So I'm noticing something here, and I think that might be because I need to add one more div here. So one thing you'll notice when it comes to web development, web design, there's a lot of divs being used. So I've put the heading and the paragraph in their own div so that these don't get flexed. So let's see the change here. And now that's a little bit better. You will notice that this isn't centered. We could actually do another text align center on this div to kind of fix that up. All right, so let's go through and let's copy the information for, actually before I copy the information, let's talk about what we see here. So notice that this is being split into essentially two columns. So what this is saying is that we have to actually add another container within this container. So let's do that. Let's call this one ID of maybe info with a class of container. Actually, do we need to do that? Actually, we don't need to do another container. We got the container. We just needed two more divs. So we'll call this one div of info. And let's call the other one a div of maybe sidebar. And let's just put something there just so we kind of see it split up. Let's see it on the screen. So there's info and sidebar. We have to flex these two items in order to get something to work. So let's go ahead and go to our CSS. Let's take our pound info and let's give it a flex of 1. And let's give that sidebar a fixed width. So let's say a width of maybe 200 px. And let's check that out. All right, so one thing I want you to see, might not be noticeable, but the sidebar is not growing, but the info does grow. Again, that's one of the things with Flexbox is that when you flex a particular column, that column will grow, but not the other one. And I think now we're ready to start putting some of that information in. But I want to show you again. Notice there was divs within the class container. Again, you can have as many nested divs as you want, depending on the complexity of your layout. So let's go bring in some of this information. So let's put this on this side instead of just info. And then let's grab the other one for the side icons. Wrong file. Let's put that over here and let's check that out. Let's see what else we can do. I also would suggest when you start doing any kind of copy and paste, and take the time to do a little cleanup with the indentations. Trust me, it's going to pay off in the end to have things properly indented because you can have so much code floating around. Okay, so let's actually break this out into its own separate page and maybe view it here because it might be a little easier to see how close we got to the actual mockup. So not too bad. I would say if you look here, it looks like the contents here are centered. So you could do that as well. It looks like the contents here are also centered. And we also forgot to color the footer blue. So let's just do that little part. of coloring the footer, and that's just an ID of footer. We can actually, is it centered? I can't remember if it was centered, but we'll just do it here. Footer, I'm going to copy the same code from here. You know, I'll give it a little padding here too. You're going to find that padding is nice when it comes to web design because it's hard to see things when they're right up against the edge. Notice the HTML right up against the blue, a little hard to see there. So you know what? We can do that with the main as well. Main. Let's give main a little padding. Again, padding's the space on the inside. And we'll be a little more generous with the padding. We'll say a padding of 20 for the main. And let's see what that looks like. Okay. So with the exception, actually, look with the padding, it almost feels like this is centered. But again, that would change a little bit once we started moving things around. So, I mean, I would say we're pretty close to the mock-up. Again, you could always go further into it and develop it more. But there you go. That is how you create a layout using Flexbox. So let's go back to our presentation. So some common sections to a website are, you know, every website needs a navigation, has a main area, has a footer. They typically have banners too. Each of those translates to a div, which when given a class of container, which then gets a display of flex, we are able to use Flexbox to rearrange the items on the screen. Enjoy.